Hello YouTube, this is Kiryu904 and welcome to part 2 of this year's Foreign Fright Fest. For this week, we'll be discussing the 1992 Mexican independent horror film Cronos, which was written and directed by the immensely talented Guillermo del Toro, who brought us pictures like Hellboy, Pan's Labyrinth, and Pacific Rim. This movie was also del Toro's directorial debut. We start off in Veracruz, Mexico during the year 1536, where an alchemist, escaping from the Inquisition, constructs an invention dubbed the Cronos device, which would be able to grant the user eternal life. Over 400 years later, in 1937, an earthquake causes a building to collapse, killing many people, and among the casualties was a man with strange marble-white skin whose chest had been pierced. It turns out this man was the alchemist. The authorities locate the residence of the alchemist and discover a hanging cadaver with its blood being drained into various basins, though this is never revealed to the public. Following an investigation, the alchemist's home and all of his possessions are sold at a public auction. However, the Cronos device is nowhere to be found, due to the fact that it was hidden within a small statue of an archangel. We then jump ahead again, 59 years later, to 1996, where we meet our main character, an old man named Jesus Gris, who lives with his wife Mercedes and granddaughter Aurora. We also see that he runs a small antique store. One day, a man walks into the store and suspiciously unwraps the paper on some of the small statues, saying very little before departing. Later, while Jesus is helping Aurora put together a puzzle, the two discover that one of the archangel statues examined by the strange man is hollow, after noticing a bunch of cockroaches emerge from a hole in its eye. After detaching the rest of the statue from its base, Jesus discovers a secret compartment and pulls out the long-lost Cronos device, while the man from earlier makes a call to his superior. Said superior, Angel de la Guardia, reports his subordinate's findings to his uncle Dieter, a wealthy businessman who is dying from an unknown ailment and seeks the Cronos device, having gathered as much information on it as he could. He's informed about the statue which housed the device and sends his nephew to retrieve it, but all Angel cares about is inheriting his uncle's money once he passes. After this, he heads down to the antique store and buys the statue, unaware that the Cronos device is no longer inside it. Once he leaves, Jesus and Aurora look over the machine, wondering what it does. The antique dealer winds it up, and eventually it extends sharp, pointed legs, which doesn't seem to perturb him. Soon, though, it clamps down on his hand, and Jesus painfully pries it off, causing him to bleed. Later on, he and his granddaughter visit his wife at her dance studio, where she bandages his wound up, but not before pulling out what appears to be a small stinger. That night, Jesus finds himself extremely thirsty, and after chugging a lot of water from his fridge, he's disturbingly tempted by a plate of bloody raw meat. Luckily, he doesn't give in to this sudden craving. However, he desperately tries cutting the bandage off his wounded hand and succeeds, then takes the Cronos device out of the shoebox he'd stored it in, and activates it. He impatiently waits for it to stick him again, which is when a long barb extends from it and pierces his wrist. We see various cogs and wheels turning inside the device, as well as an odd-looking insect. During this, Jesus experiences a euphoric sensation until the machine withdraws the barb and folds back up. It's then that the man catches Aurora staring at him, having been disturbed by his commotion. He quickly reassures her that he's fine, and the girl returns to bed. The next morning, Jesus ends up shaving his mustache, and his wife remarks how much younger he looks. He also refuses breakfast, and strangely closes the dining room blinds, saying that it's too bright. He then heads out to open his store, but upon arriving, the dealer finds the place has been ransacked, no doubt by Dieter's thugs in an attempt to locate the Cronos device after finding out it wasn't in the Archangel statue. Jesus then sees a De La Guardia business card on the table and decides to pay them a visit in order to get answers, bringing the device along with him. He speaks with Dieter, who explains the history of the Cronos device and how it functions, talking about an insect trapped inside which acts as a living filter. Jesus is skeptical that an insect could survive inside the machine for that long, to which Dieter goes on about insects being able to survive for several years trapped within rocks, and describes them as God's favorite creatures. But more importantly, he mentions a rule about the device's use. Upon being asked by Jesus why he's telling him all this, the businessman describes his own failing health being the reason for obtaining the invention. Jesus then tries to keep Dieter from taking the machine, which tips off the terminally ill man that he's already used it. Angered, he has Angel kick the antique dealer out, but when he opens the shoebox that Jesus brought with him, it turns out all he had was a padlock. Meanwhile, Jesus races home to use the Cronos device once again, although he finds it's missing. He quickly deduces that Aurora must have taken it and rushes around his house looking for her. He soon locates her on top of the roof, trying to hide from him, and the elderly man shares how, when her dad was her age, he tried getting rid of his cigarettes after learning about lung cancer. He would later learn that this action wouldn't do any good, but Jesus understood that his son was worried for him. This anecdote manages to persuade Aurora to return the machine. We then cut to New Year's Eve, where the family is preparing to attend a party. However, Jesus continues using the Cronos invention in the bathroom. Once finished, he finds that a strange sticky substance is coming from his injection wounds, and that they rapidly heal. At the party, Jesus enjoys his youthful vigor while dancing with his wife, as Aurora looks on with sadness and worry. A short time after, the couple are having fun chatting with others, when suddenly Jesus spots a man with a nosebleed and follows him to the restroom. He quickly notices the blood the partygoer leaked onto the sink, and waits for him to enter a stall before attempting to get a taste, but is almost caught by another guest exiting a different stall, who proceeds to wipe the blood down the sink with his bare hands. He doesn't even use a tissue. Gross. Once he leaves, Jesus spots a smaller puddle of blood on the floor, and we're treated to this scene of him slowly lapping it up. And it's just disgusting. This turns out to be one of the drawbacks of the Cronos device. The user must feast on human blood. Fortunately, we aren't subjected to this part for long, as Angel walks in, having tracked him down and kicks him in the face, knocking him out cold. His wife and granddaughter, meanwhile, sadly missing him as the new year commences. Angel takes Jesus far away to a secluded area, where he viciously beats him in order to learn the whereabouts of the Cronos device, although he doesn't get any answers. So, the irritated nephew places the antique dealer inside his own car and pushes him over a cliff, killing him and making it look like a drunk driving accident. I'm pretty sure the police would be able to tell that this was foul play, but okay. After Jesus' family is informed of his passing, we jump to a coroner named Tito preparing the man's body for a funeral, and we learn that he's to be cremated afterwards. During this, Angel reports back to his uncle, who becomes very irate after learning of the method used to dispose of Jesus, and that his heart wasn't pierced by anything. Soon, Angel sneaks into the funeral held for Jesus, and checks to make sure he's really dead by pinching his nose shut. After this, Tito readies the seemingly dead man for cremation, shutting the coffin and leaving to check and make sure the furnace burns properly before returning to see the coffin mysteriously open once again. But he simply shrugs it off, shutting it a second time and sliding it in, which is when Angel arrives, claiming to be a friend of Jesus. But really it's just to confirm that he's dead, which he already did earlier, but I guess he's just being thorough. We see that Jesus actually resurrected and managed to escape, but he's in pretty bad shape, with his skin beginning to peel off. He then uses a shard of glass to cut the stitches out of his mouth, and proceeds to call his wife, but she hangs up, not believing it's him. The decaying man makes his way home, where he's greeted by Aurora, who's surprisingly unfazed by his return and appearance. Later in the day, she clears out her toy trunk in their shed, and turns it into some sort of coffin for him to sleep in. Just before he settles into it, rays of light shine through holes in the ceiling, burning Jesus' skin and causing great pain. Although in some shots there's sunlight on him and he isn't getting burnt. It's quite clear now he's become a vampire, or a similar type of creature. Later, the undead man writes a letter to his wife explaining his condition, and that he's going to seek answers concerning it. He then sets out and has Aurora leave the letter for Mercedes. Jesus stealthily makes his way into De La Guardia Enterprises, but quickly finds that his granddaughter has followed him there. But, rather than send her home where she'd be safe, he recklessly endangers the girl by bringing her along. The two rummage through Dieter's notes, hoping to find something, which is when the man himself shows up, having expected them. He tells Jesus that he ate the notes he was looking for. Jesus bemoans his rotting skin, which is when Dieter tells him to peel it off. Jesus does so, discovering the same marble-white complexion that the alchemist from the start had. As this happens, the businessman silently summons Angel to his room. Dieter then reveals to the vampiric man that he must consume human blood to live eternally. Jesus then threatens to destroy the Cronos device, but the businessman says that if he does so, it'll result in his death. The antique dealer ultimately doesn't care about eternity and demands a way to return to normal. The uncle agrees, only on the condition that he surrenders the device. Not having much choice, Jesus prepares to hand it over. However, he's stabbed by Dieter with a knife hidden in one of his canes. The two fight for a minute, with Dieter gaining the upper hand. Before he can stab his heart, though, Aurora whacks him over the head with his other cane, knocking him out. Jesus then starts to feed on the unconscious man to regain his strength, but he's interrupted when Angel arrives. Upon discovering Dieter, he's elated, believing he'll finally inherit his fortune. That is, until his uncle comes too, but his nephew puts his foot down on his neck and crushes it, killing him. Jesus immediately comes out of hiding, landing a blow on Angel's nose, and makes a quick getaway with Aurora out a window. The injured man swiftly pursues the two up to the roof with a hand railing. Jesus is able to get Aurora to safety before confronting Angel, who beats him relentlessly. Although the former manages to grab onto the ladder and launch themselves off the building, killing Angel and sending himself unconscious. Aurora makes her way down to her grandfather and revives him using the Cronos device. Once awakened, Jesus proceeds to peel more of his old skin off his stomach, further revealing the white skin underneath. Here's a fun fact: shedding skin is actually part of ancient vampire folklore, so points to this film for that. Jesus is initially relieved to see Aurora, but is tempted to feed on her after seeing a cut on her hand. Fortunately, he resists his thirst and smashes the Cronos device with a rock, killing the insect within. And, like Dieter warned him earlier, Jesus begins dying because of this. Finally, we see him lying in his bed at home, with completely pale white skin, as his granddaughter and wife comfort him until his death. And the movie ends. So, that was Cronos. I'll admit, I haven't seen that many of Del Toro's films, so I couldn't say how well this compares with his others, but I thought this was a quite well-made directorial debut. It has a distinct mystical and eerie feel that permeates throughout the film. Much like The Curse of the Werewolf was a unique take on lycanthropy, this was a unique take on vampirism. The movie does a great job at portraying immortality as a curse rather than a gift, and how it avoids the various tropes associated with vampires in pop culture. The acting was very natural. Federico Lupi was great as our sympathetic vampire protagonist, and Ron Perlman was quite entertaining. The practical effects looked amazing, and the score was appropriately whimsical and melancholy. Also, this is just how I interpreted it, but Jesus' need for the Cronos device was comparable to a drug addiction, like cocaine or heroin. In closing, I'd recommend Cronos for those who are searching for a more unique take on vampires. And that concludes Part 2 of 2024's Foreign Fright Fest. Come back next time where we finish off this year's marathon with a J-horror found footage film. Be sure to leave a comment, thumbs up if you enjoyed this movie review, and subscribe if you'd like to see more. You can also follow me on Twitter. Goodbye, and have a good day, everyone.